Imagine you're a fly on the wall during a lively debate at a British pub, with a group of friends passionately discussing the latest news. That's the vibe that Patrick Christys from GB News brought to his interview with broadcaster Carole Malone, journalist Benjamin Butterworth, and former Conservative Party chairman Sir Jake Berry. The topic of the day? The government's handling of immigration protests and the curious case of police priorities.
Welcome along. It is starting to look like the worst crime you can commit in Keir Starmer's Britain is wanting to stop the boats. Here was a very small protest in Bournemouth yesterday against mass immigration. Yeah, I mean, that was literally it.
Patrick leads with the zinger. Is it now a thought crime in Keir Starmer's Britain to oppose boats? This question speaks to what this discussion is about, as much the absurdity of modern politics. Patrick nudges you with an elbow and raises an eyebrow as if to say, "Took them long enough?" You may feel scared. Yeah, just that is scary enough to me.
Can you guess what happened? They sent 5 different police forces to attend that. 5. Yeah, Dorset Police, which had already been...
Patrick begins by detailing the odd scenes in Bournemouth, where a small demonstration against mass immigration prompted not 1 but 5 separate police forces to be called into action. Dorset Police, the Met, Thames Valley, Hampshire, that last one twice as many officers, Avon and Somerset, with Devon and Cornwall. Are you having a bubble? You feel familiar with those names, right? With an almost bemused sense of incredulity, Patrick rasps out for emphasis. It is tantamount to calling in the cavalry for a minor traffic ticket.
Well, that's what it's looking like, you know. It is incredible. That thing the weekend, that protest, you know, I wish they had 5 police forces for some of the pro-Palestinian protests, where there are tens of thousands of people on the street, and yet no one gets arrested. And you mentioned some really good examples there. You know, that they were not rioters at that protest. They were peaceful protests, and the people making the most noise were the Stand Up for Racists, they were across the road. There was 80 odd of them. They were the ones doing the shouting. Are you laughing at me? What are you laughing at?
Carole Malone jumps in, equally incredulous. It's incredible, isn't it? They send 5 police forces for a peaceful protest in Bournemouth, but when it comes to the massive pro-Palestinian protests, where were they? She asks, her voice dripping with irony. They were peaceful, they say, but we all know who was really making the noise. And here's where it gets really funny, or tragic, depending on your perspective. Carole mixes up the name of the anti-racism group, calling them Stand Up for Racists instead of Stand Up to Racism. A classic slip that Patrick and Benjamin can't resist pouncing on. Are you laughing at me? She asks, only half joking. It's Stand Up Against Racism, Carole, Benjamin corrects, laughing. Carole quickly recovers, but the point is made. This conversation is as much about slips of the tongue as it is about slips in policy.
I mean, that is the reality, isn't it? It's all very well and good now, you know, locking a load of people up. And it's fine to say that a woman, regardless of whether or not she's a mother of 6, who threw a brick at a police officer, and I think I'm right in saying was seen handing another brick to a child, I think many people would think, that's the kind of thing you might go to prison for. All right, maybe.
It's a sort of...
That brought the conversation to a specific example that Patrick feels highlights everything wrong with society and culture. The judiciary. Which point we make pleasantry slamming by discussing 2 cases Patrick says encapsulate how ridiculous our legal system has become. A 6-children mother lobs a brick at cop, and the best they get is 2 years. Yet a man who has been violent in the past and once tried to kill an unborn child by suffocation receives only a suspended sentence. What's going on here? That is the question that we may ask when hearing this.
Saying that you might get a suspended prison sentence for if you had a clean record.
Because this is it. Because then you look at the other person who was sentenced today to a suspended sentence, who was a man with a history of domestic violence, who tried to, smother a pregnant woman with a pillow. And you think, well, that guy's got a suspended sentence. And I do wonder, Benjamin, here, if you know, realistically, is it now seen as the worst crime to just be against mass migration?
Well, I don't know.
Carole doesn't miss a beat. It's like the world's gone mad, she says. You get a slap on the wrist for attempted murder, but heaven forbid you throw a brick. She's outraged, and so is Patrick, who adds, it makes you wonder what the worst crime really is these days. Is it being against mass migration?
What happened
Seriously?
What happened there is that the police were concerned about what had broken out in the rest of the country. And I think, you know, as a former scout, it's be prepared is the resolution that police should have.
It was 20 people.
Benjamin, however, isn't having any of it. What I don't understand, he says, is why so many people with mainstream views on immigration feel the need to align themselves with far-right racists. It's a bold statement, and it doesn't go down well with Carole, who immediately challenges him. Do you seriously think those people in Bournemouth were far-right racists?
That riots are a social contagion. They spread. They cause a level of damage and disorder and disruption out of proportion with any individual protest or attack. And that's why you can't let it go out of control.
And here's where the debate gets heated. Benjamin insists that the police were justified in their actions, arguing that protests can quickly spiral out of control, leading to riots. Riots are a social contagion, he says. They spread and cause damage out of proportion with any individual protest. Sounds dangerous, I think.
So many right-wingers.
People, Benjamin, making a protest about something that lots of...
Carole isn't convinced. That was no riot, Benjamin. It was 20 people sitting on a step with a flag. What are you talking about? The two continue to spar, with Carole insisting that ordinary people are being unfairly labeled as extremists, while Benjamin warns of the dangers of downplaying the threat of far-right violence.
It's right that if this woman lobbed a brick at a police officer that she has been sent to prison, because an attack on the police is an attack on society. It's an attack on all of us, actually, so that is the right thing. It sounds like the wrong sentence with the serial domestic violence woman abuser who tried to smother a woman. But let's just take a step back about the big mistake I think Keir Starmer is making here. The reason the Conservatives lost the election so badly is for election after election, we promised that we were going to get a grip on immigration. We didn't. The British people punished us. And I think they will do the same with Keir Starmer. He's almost, not quite there, but he's almost saying to be concerned about immigration, you are racist.
Exactly.
You are not. He's not said that. But it feels like the implication of what he is saying. And I'm concerned about immigration, and I'm not racist. And then the final point I'd make is, I'm actually really worried about the violence we're seeing from these counter-protesters from the hard left, who are going along to these, 20 people turning up in Bournemouth to protest quite peacefully. It looked like an England game, didn't it, more than any sort of protest. Then you have these hard left protests where there has been a lot of violent disorder, particularly in London. What is happening to those people? I'm not aware of any arrest, and this plays into this narrative of this two-tier policing, which I think is corrosive for the country.
So, Carole, when
Sir Jake Berry, sitting quietly until now, decides to jump into the fray. His take? The whole situation is a mess, and Keir Starmer is making it worse. The reason the Conservatives lost the election is because we promised to get a grip on immigration and failed. Now, Starmer is doing the same thing, and the British people won't stand for it. Berry goes on to express his concern about the growing violence at counter-protests, particularly from the hard left. What's happening to those people? He asks. Why aren't they being arrested? He's worried about what he sees as two-tier policing, where certain protests are treated more harshly than others based on their political leanings.
When it all first started kicking off, right, very quickly, it was all far right this, far right that, far right this, far right that. And then we got whopping great big numbers of arrests, whopping great big prison sentences, brackets up to it. And now Keir Starmer has openly stood up and used the word racist. Racist, you're a racist if you do this stuff.
Patrick nods in agreement, pointing out that Starmer's rhetoric could be dangerous. He's labeled anyone who protests as a racist, which opens the door for peaceful protesters to be smeared and cut off. Maybe the Prime Minister cannot convince those people here enough, which I hope it can be better somehow. As the discussion winds down, it's clear that there's no consensus among the panel. Carole is furious about what she sees as the government's double standards. Benjamin is worried about the rise of far-right extremism, and Sir Jake Berry is concerned about the long-term political implications of Starmer's approach. But one thing they all agree on is that the country is in a precarious place. If his popularity keeps dropping, Patrick says, Starmer might find himself out of favor sooner than he thinks. Carole quips, he's in the negatives now. Benjamin, ever the realist, points out that making tough decisions often comes with a drop in approval ratings. But he's adamant that the government needs to crack down on both far-right and far-left extremism to keep the country safe. Wow, maybe they can be listened by the government now. In the end, the debate is a microcosm of the larger national conversation happening in Britain today. It's a country at odds with itself, struggling to find a balance between security and freedom, between protest and order. And through it all, the question remains, what is the worst crime in Keir Starmer's Britain? Is it throwing a brick, protesting immigration, or simply having an opinion that doesn't fit the narrative?